Welcome to the Inverclyde IGB. My name's Alan Cowan. For those that don't know me, I'm the chair of the IGB. I'm one of the NHS non-executive members. I will start by welcoming any members of the public or the media that have chosen to be present today. You're welcome as observers. I'm keen to see you. Just a reminder that you do attend as observers, so we aren't able to take questions in this forum. There are other ways to do that. And so I would ask you, if you're present today, to not use the chat facility and to not raise your hand for a question. Otherwise, I'm happy for you to obviously observe the process. I normally read a standard statement. I'll do that now. The meeting is being held remotely and will be filmed and recorded for live and subsequent broadcast available through the Council's website. The IGB is a joint data controller with Inverclyde Council and NHS Greater Glasgow and Clyde under the General Data Protection Regulations and the Data Protection Act. The meeting will be broadcast and recorded to fulfil our public task obligation to enable members of the public to observe the democratic process. The data collected during this remote meeting will be retained in accordance with the Council's published policies available through the Council's website. And maybe just members of the Integration Joint Board are reminded that they should follow the IGB's meeting protocol, including around the use of the chat facility, and that comments made in the chat facility are available to all participants in the meeting, which may include members of the public. Thank you. So with that, let me start by, as always, thanking officers for preparing the papers and also for making themselves available to take our questions. Can I, just as ever, assume that everyone's had a chance to read the papers and familiarise themselves with the content? I'll, as always, ask the sponsor simply to introduce the paper, summarise broadly the paper's intent, and walk us through the recommendations or any of the asks that are contained in the paper. There'll be no need to go through it page by page. So standard stuff. That was my clock going again. And then, of course, once I've done that, I'll move us on to members' questions. It looks to me like a fairly procedural agenda today. I think Christina had mentioned that. As always, when you say that, you find you get to a subject where everybody wants to contribute, and actually it becomes quite complicated. But we don't seem to have any controversial decisions to make today. So I'm confident with your support that we will get through this. I hope by 4 o'clock for a change rather than 5. So we'll see how that goes. As always, please allow me just to move us along when I think the conversation has reached a conclusion, particularly if we're going back around previously asked questions. Allow me as the chair just to move us on to the next item if that's appropriate. So with that, can we move to item 1? Which is the standard item, which is apologies, substitutions and declarations of interest. I've got apologies from, where are my notes? I think Gemma Erdley and I think Margaret Tate were the 2 apologies that were given to me earlier. I don't believe there are any substitutions. I'll just pause to see if there are any other apologies. I think there are. And I see it all. Let's look. Thanks. So that moves us on to declarations of interest. There is a standard declaration that Ms. Boyd makes that she is a member of the board of the Carers Centre. The board notes that. Are there any other declarations of interest? I'm not seeing any.
Sorry, Chair, Councillor McCluskey has something.
I see that now. Thank you very much. Martin, please go ahead.
Thanks, Alan. It's just my standard declaration under item 10. I have a close family member who is in one of the care homes mentioned in the report.
Thanks, Martin. Thanks for that. We know board notes that. And when we get to that point, of course, if Martin feels that there's a clash of interest, I hope he'd flag that up and we'll deal with it at that time. Normally there isn't. So that moves us nicely to item 2, colleagues. That is the minute of the last meeting, which was held on the 20th of March 23, an 8-page minute. I'll just normally, as I always do, offer you the opportunity to tell me if there's any issues of fact, accuracy, clarity or omission that the board should note at this point before we approve that minute. So any issues of fact, accuracy, clarity or omission. I'm not seeing any hands at this stage, so I'm going to move on. Are there any matters arising the board members would want to raise at this point for issues that are not already on the agenda for subsequent discussion? So any matters arising that fall out of that minute? Again, I'll just pause and allow hands to appear or comment in the chat. I'm not seeing anything at this stage, and I don't want to complicate our discussion. There are a couple of things that I'll maybe just quickly point to. We've had a long discussion, and this is minute 19 on the previous minute. We've had a long discussion about funding and returning funding and COVID funding and stuff like that. I would just want to make the board aware that per minute 19 there, we wrote to the Scottish Government, and I did raise it both with the IJB Chair of Chairs and the Health Board. I'd want to bring you up to date with all of that. I mean, there's been some subsequent work done by Health and Social Care Scotland across the IJB network, and it basically brings clearly into transparency the risks and the costs that the IJB is carrying this coming year, and some of the financial challenges, and they reflect the challenges we have in Inverclyde. The reason I raised that is because the report that Health and Social Care Scotland produced points to, among other things, I think there are 15 areas of pressure. Pay inflation is one. One of those other that is common was the whole issue of having to return COVID funding. And that's going to be, I guess, part of a discussion that we, the chairs, the vice chairs, and the chief officers are having on Thursday with the Cabinet Secretary. So whether we get into that level of detail, I don't know, but that's not, I'm not saying it's a live issue, but it continues to be an issue for which at government level there is some focus. So hopefully that just completes that discussion we had at minute 19. The other issue that I think it's probably worth just pointing to is at minute 22, we did ask officers to put on the rolling action list, and this is not coming up, any dates that we have an obligation to report by on our equalities duty. So again, I'll just offer the chief officer maybe the option of just confirming that they'll do that at the next turn of the dice for the rolling action list. I think it's quite helpful to know. I think we've got a report, for example, at the end of the year, December, when we're due an update report, and we have other waypoints when I know we've got to report. So I'll just pause and allow Kate maybe just to talk to that.
Yeah, so we have reviewed the rolling action list, and including within that review, we've added in our statutory reporting schedule that allows for the IJB to understand at what periods in time where we are working on statutory plans or are responsible for a statutory plan, such as the children's plan, as part of a partnership approach, that the IJB will be aware of when these plans are coming in terms of good governance. On top of that, we just got the dates for the new IJB sessions, our new IJB meetings for the next year, and that was just sent to me today by legal services. So hopefully that will be outlined within that report that is brought in June.
Thanks, Kate. So for the benefit of the minute and the record, we're going to continue to build on the quality of the rolling action list and to add these dates in as they become aware, particularly the one around the equalities business, which was a significant issue for the board, just so that members are reminded that we've got an obligation at the end of the year, I think, to bring an update report or to have a discussion with the EHRC. Any other issues and matters arising, folks, before we approve the minute and move on? I'll just wait for hands. I'm not seeing. Are we happy, therefore, to approve the minute of the 23rd of March? I suspect we are. Thanks very much, folks. That moves us nicely on to item 3, which is a non-voting membership of the IJB. I'll hand over to Vicky.
Thank you, Chair. The purpose of this report is to ask the IJB to note the appointment of Jonathan Hines as the Chief Social Work Officer, non-voting member of the IJB, to replace Alan Stevenson. I've also 2 additional membership matters just to highlight to the IJB, only for noting. The first is for the IJB to note that Councillor Brennan has replaced Councillor Jackson as the proxy member to attend meetings in the absence of Councillor Moran. This was agreed by Inverclyde Council on the 20th of April. The second matter for the IJB to note is that Donald McQuaid is now the proxy member for Margaret Tate, who's the service user representative. I'm happy to take any questions.
Thanks. Colleagues, any questions for Vicky? Fairly straightforward, I think. Are we therefore happy to approve the recommendation at 2.1? Thank you. That nicely moves us on to the first substantial item, which is item 4. This is an update on our financial position at not quite the year end, at period 11, so that would be February. And I'll hand over to Craig.
Thank you very much, Chair. This is a financial monitoring report covering the IJB's finances up to the end of period 11. At page 11, we're showing a projected underspend of just shy of £2.1 million. This is split by just over over 2 million in the health side and just under 77,000 on the, I've said that wrong, 2 million in the council side and 77,000 on the health side. On the social care side, this is mainly due to vacancies across pretty much all areas of the social care element. However, the highest level of vacancies sits under older adults. This is part of the organisation that's currently subject to the care at home review, which is ongoing, and we hope to bring to the next IGIB, and this will move the HSCP forward and be able to recruit for these posts. We're also projecting an underspend of £607,000 in external home care. On the health side, the budget, we're projecting an underspend of £77,000 overall. The report shows we've continued pressures in mental health inpatients budget and the prescribing budget. This is offset by underspends, mainly due to vacancies in supplies and services as well. Section 7 of the report highlights the current position of the earmarked reserves, where we started the year at 28.325 million, and at page 11 we expect to complete the year at just over 22 million. We're also requesting the earmarking of a number of grants funds highlighted in the table in the section, and funding similar to what we've done in previous years. We highlight the position of the Transformation Fund in section 9 and note there's been no further bids for this particular report. The capital position is shown in section 10 and highlights the progress of our capital programme, showing the majority of the spend is going to take place in the new financial year onwards. These are, as is always the case, this is a large report, and as always, we're more than happy to take any questions or queries anyone might have.
Yeah, thanks, Craig. I'll open it to colleagues for questions about our financial position at the end of, almost at the end of the financial year. Christina.
Yes, I noticed that the set-aside budget had increased substantially by about an extra 5 million or so. Now, I realise the set-aside's not an exact science, but is it usually such a large variance of 5 million? Did that have an impact on spending that we did anywhere else, or was it just a case that had an impact on the reserves? And the other thing I just wanted to ask about under that was there was a 284,000 underspend on carers. Now, was that mainly due to staff shortages and help with home care, or what was the actual breakdown of that?
Thanks, Christina. Craig?
Okay, I'm happy to come in on both of them. Yep, the set-aside has had no impact at all in any kind of service delivery or anything like that. That is just a figure that we get given from, as we've said before, from the health board. We got the set-aside, an updated figure, quite recently, so we felt we obviously have an obligation to put that forward. It's a bit of I don't want to say non-event, but it has no impact on the HSCP overall. It's what we would refer to as an in and out kind of thing, but we get an allocation. So I suppose I just want to give you assurance that it's got no material impact upon any service delivery or anything within our HSCP. The carer side of things is an underspend that we've had during the year, and this is obviously, I'm going to ask Alan Best to come in at the back of me here as well. But my understanding is this is an issue we've had post-COVID and been able to get the services back up and running and the spend that's taking place here. I suppose, again, I just want to highlight that this is an area we've asked for this to be earmarked, again, specifically against carers for that particular reason, to make sure that we develop plans in the coming years to make sure we spend that specifically against carers. So we're earmarking it and requesting the earmark here so that we put it into that particular area so that we can identify areas for that going forward. Don't know, Alan, if you'd like to come in on the back of that.
Thank you, Craig, and for yourself, Chair. Apologies, they're digging the road up outside. They started the minute the meeting started, so hopefully you can hear me. Just as Craig was saying there, the service recognise there is a post-COVID, there has been a challenge in terms of promoting and promoting short breaks and respite in terms of people's own wish to uptake respite, short breaks, and also in some cases availability. It is something the service is looking at and is openly promoting, and we would hope that moving away from the pandemic, they would see that position sort of normalising as it was before. But the service is still committed to that area of supporting our community. Thank you.
Thanks both of you. Christina?
Could I just ask, if it's an issue of availability, how do you think the availability will improve in the coming year?
Go on, Alan.
Thank you for yourself, Chair. This will be a case of us working with our external providers and organisations about promoting short breaks and carers. And as I say, they're not immune to what we see currently across a lot of our services in terms of recruitment and retention of staff. But again, it's working in partnership to promote this service and ensure that we've got a robust marketplace in the future.
Yeah, thanks.
Thanks, Alan. Diana?
Hi, I've got two questions. I suppose once again, the underspends are largely due to vacant posts and them not being filled. And we're hearing in the Staff Partnership Forum that people are being appointed to posts, and the time it is taking to get them into the post, they're actually leaving and going and working elsewhere. We have asked for a working party to be set up with HR to discuss why it takes so long to fill a post. And the other question I wanted to ask, which is, if I'm reading Appendix 6 right, the Transformation Board agreed back in September to appoint a number of posts, and as yet none of that money has been spent. So am I right in thinking that these posts haven't been filled either?
Go ahead, Craig.
Yeah, I probably can take the last one first. As I say, I'm frantically trying to find my notes here, but I'm assuming it's around the SWIFT project is the big one from the posts. That's one which we are looking at the moment, and we're looking at in totality with the SWIFT project. So those posts are in the process we're looking at the moment, but we're obviously aware that we are with the SWIFT project is ongoing at the moment, and we're going to bring an update shortly on the SWIFT project. So those ones, correct? They're not filled at this particular moment, but it is very much on our agenda going forward. The overall vacancies situation is something I don't know if maybe either Kate or somebody else wants to come in on this one as well, but it's the issues that I believe are taking place nationally with vacancies at the moment. I'm not particularly aware of posts where people have been appointed to them and then went elsewhere. That's maybe probably because I haven't seen those particular ones. I don't know if Kate wants to come in on this as well.
Yeah, sorry. Yeah, certainly, Diana, you and I had a discussion about that last week, and I'm keen to understand where this is a risk, when it becomes a risk, that we kind of escalate it through, particularly the HSCP and the senior management team. The other thing, I think there's a recognition from the council side that there needs to be a review of our HR processes, and as a result, there is an independent review being carried out as we speak to look at the recruitment, and particularly retention is one of the issues that we're picking up across the whole of the HSCP and will be reflected in our workforce plan. So just to say that we know that it is an issue, we've taken action, but I am also keen to understand, and the heads of service are keen to understand where these individual issues lie. So if we could make sure that we're kind of escalating it across the system. And Diana, you and I agreed that that's what we would do.
Thanks, Kate. Diana, did you want to come back on any of that?
No, only that it does seem to be the Transformation Board, I don't really understand what it was that Craig said in terms of being slow to recruit those. And this is the number of vacancies is maybe something we need to keep an eye on as an IJB in the future.
So
Thanks. Before we move on, can I just be clear, when we're talking about the recruitment of staff, obviously the staff are work for either the council or the health board. Am I right in saying that your point is about staff recruited on the council side of the partnership, or is it more wide than that? Is it any staff member on either side, council or healthcare? Because I'm not sure.
Both.
It's really a question for Diana.
It's both health
both,
and
okay.
council.
Okay, Craig.
Sorry, no, I just wanted to come back there, but I probably maybe didn't explain that as well as I should have regarding the Swift side. What I was trying to get across was we're recruiting to them as and when we need the particular posts. So based on how the project's moving along is on the basis of when we actually recruit to the posts. We got approval from the IJB for the full amount, but we didn't state at that particular point what the actual timescales and what the milestones were. Obviously, as the project moves through, particular parts become critical, and we're aiming the recruitment on the basis of when those particular parts are coming about. So we recruit based to those timescales. Hopefully that can try and make it a wee bit clearer.
Yeah, thanks, Craig. Kate, did you want to say something?
No, it just Craig's explained it. It's proportionate to where we are in the project. We wouldn't put posts in until we needed them.
Okay, understood. But I think I'm trying to be a devil's advocate here, and I wonder if maybe we could use the project number to make it easier to focus on what we're talking about. I wonder if Diana was actually talking about 40, which is the 5 temporary qualified social worker posts, which there appears to be no spend against. I think Diana said 6. So it's just a case of that. None of us clearly want a slow recruitment process. We all want to see staff that are recruited progress through the induction process quickly and into service. So I don't think any of us are would want to see a slow process. Let me move on to Simon. Simon.
Thanks very much, Chair. My question was in a similar area to Christina's, i.e. the set-aside situation. Yeah, and I had 2 questions about it, really. The final bullet point says or talks about set-aside functions are strongly tied into the commissioning and market facilitation work that is ongoing. I just wondered where that was. You know, is there any prospect of an early conclusion to that work? And the second point is tied up with the introductory paragraph to 5.7. Yeah, and as Christina noted, there's round about a £5 million increase in the set aside. And I accept that that's currently notional. Yeah, if once we move into the commissioning market facilitation work, once that's concluded, does that extra 5 million, is there a prospect that that extra 5 million will have an impact on our revenue position going forward, or will it remain notional, Craig?
Okay, thanks, Simon. I'll maybe get Craig to take the financial point first, and then we'll go back to the market facilitation point. Craig.
Okay. The final point is it does remain notional at the moment. It doesn't have any impact on us here. But I think what I'm going to do, if it's okay, I'm going to take this away and have a look at set-aside again to see if I can issue something that's maybe a wee bit clearer to people. This is an issue that seems to come up every 6 months that I do notice here, to see if I can try and get a wee bit more clarity around it, if that's okay, just because I know that it's a particularly tricky one to explain. So if that would be okay, Simon.
Yeah, of course it's okay, Craig. Yeah, and it is tricky. Yeah, and it's tricky because it's never been implemented in the 7-8 years of the Public Bodies Act. We've never been able to crack the application of it. But the whole point of set aside when it was introduced, yeah, was that it would have an implication on revenue funding, yeah, because if we use less hospital than we were in the set-aside budget, then resources would flood back into the community. Yeah, if we used more resources than the set aside, yeah, then resources would move from the community into the hospital setting. Yeah, so that's why I asked the question about the £5 million increase. Is it likely to have any impact going forward? So I think a briefing note, Craig, or a development session item on set aside would be helpful, because it seems to have got lost. Yeah, it seems to have disappeared from, I don't know, our current thinking anyway, our contemporary thinking.
Okay.
So it would be helpful. Thank you.
Thanks, Simon. Maybe I could just say a word. So I think there's two things there. So Craig, thank you. It is probably helpful to look at that last bullet in isolation. And as you said, it may be helpful to members maybe just to go beyond saying that work is ongoing. It would be helpful to understand what it is that is going on there, what the time frame for completing any work on commissioning markets. Just opening that up to a little bit more scrutiny would be helpful. So we'll return to that perhaps as an action at the next meeting. Simon's wider point is effective. I can summarise it, is that we get funding for the set aside, and that's X. In this case, it was 29 and an odd million, but obviously we consumed 34 and some million in the spend. It's notional in the sense that the HSCP doesn't have to make up that difference. And so that extra £5+ million is found, I'm presuming, in the health board to make the hospital system work. Simon's point is when you draw a baseline, and if we draw the baseline at 29 million, we'd be 5 million short this year. So there will always be an issue for this HSCP and others when we come to look at set aside, which is for hospital services. And if that's to be passed over, we will want to assure ourselves as a board that it's passed over in its fullness and it reflects the widest set of factors that we can understand, so that we don't get shortchanged when we're past that. And so volatility over time, so knowing what we spent or knowing what has been spent on set aside over a number of years will be really important to the IGB. If at any time the partners want to pass that over to us, we shouldn't just look at one isolated year. We need to look at a range of time and make sure that we're comfortable with the resource. I think that might be the heart of what Simon's getting at, is don't take your eye off this. This is quite a complex issue. The issue about when it's supposed to be passed over, I can't add anything to what Simon has mentioned. I'm not aware of any movement for the set aside to be anything other than it is, which is a notional costing of what our hospital services consume. So I hope for some that might be helpful. Simon, did you want to come back before I move on?
No, that's fine. I welcome Craig's suggestion that we have another look at this, 3-6 months time.
Okay, no, thanks, Simon. I've just got one question, and it's really about under and overspends. I mean, we are coming in with a bit of an underspend this year, but it masks the fact that we've got quite a big overspend in mental health inpatient services, and we know we've got an overspend on children's and families. And so it was just really to give the board a little bit of assurance around the major overspend areas and what we're doing as we move through the year to I guess, contain those to where they are now, don't let them get any bigger, but also be looking to how we can rebalance those so that they don't become a real challenge for the board. And I really am thinking about the £1+ million on inpatient mental health, and I think maybe over £500,000 in children's and families. There's some big overspends there. Did you want to say something about that, Craig, that gives us a bit of assurance?
Certainly on the children and family side of things, I know that Jonathan's working very hard at the moment in an overall children and families, looking at that service in totality with the view of to see where that can be done, where that can be maybe streamlined. I don't know if Jonathan wants to come in, or Kate wants to come in with a wee bit more around that side of things. Certainly around the mental health inpatients, I believe this has been a historic pressure which has been in place for quite a number of years now, which we've always had no real choice but to cover that within the overall funding envelope that we've got. We've never really been able to bring that down for various reasons. So that's the children and families one. I feel that's something we've got probably within our greater scope to do something about. The mental health one is a bit more tricky. I don't know if Kate, if you want to add anything on to that.
I'm happy to come in both. So Craig, Jonathan and myself are going to kind of review where the money sits and the funding sits in children's services to ensure that we are now and in the future meeting the demands that may be presented. You'll see from the Health and Social Care report that came out that Children's Services is a particular pressure and has been for integrated health and social care partnerships, because no funding was given into Children's Services, but the impact for children has been significant through the pandemic, and that's what we are seeing in Inverclyde. So we need to then decide what is our priorities moving forward as a health and social care partnership and about how we do that. Part of it will be redesigning services, but this will take some time. You just can't suddenly undo harm for children, and it's certainly you can't suddenly undo the impact of trauma for children. So we're seeing this, and we have some plans to try and strengthen our supports to families at a very earlier stage, but will take some time. But in the meanwhile, we will look at what if the funding is right to begin with in Children's Services, bearing in mind the footprint that we have on our resources. And for Children's Services, it's incredibly expensive resources in terms of unit cost. The second issue is about the mental health. We have to staff that ward safely. We provide that service not just for Inverclyde, but as part of a broader Greater Glasgow and Clyde approach to mental health services. I understand our £1 million overspend. That is a reduction in what it's been over the years. So I know that doesn't feel like that. And until we get decisions made about the whole system approach around GG&C, it's something that we're going to have to manage in terms of the risk, because we have very complex individuals that require care, and we can't deny them that care on the basis that of the cost of genuinely around cover for psychiatrists and locums. So that's where we are, and it's something that we're going to have to continue to manage as part of our bottom line moving forward.
Thanks, Kate. So I might just say that so the board will really, of course, they'll still take an active interest in those major areas of overspend that we have and be concerned about those. But thank you for that. Are there any other questions before I move to the recommendations? I'm not seeing any hands. Members, what we've got is we've come to almost to the end of year position. We have as ever, a slight underspend, around about 2 million, most of that social care, and also a reduction in a reserve position. But our reserve position is still greater than, I think, 22 million in reserve when you include the general reserve. That's actually a much better position than most IGBs of our size, and actually I think it's even better than Glasgow's, which is huge. So we do go into the year with a slightly more resilient position than many, but that wouldn't be for us to be complacent about that. So with that, can I ask you just to note and be content to approve the recommendations, which are at 2-1. Thanks very much. Let's move on then. So that takes us to the rolling action list. Again, I'll just hand that over to Kate to see if there's any of the rolling actions she wants to point to. Since we last spoke, we have had a little side meeting about the rolling actions, Vice Chair, myself, with Kate and Craig and others, and we've done if you like, a scrutiny review of that to try and bring items forward to close them, and where we need to push items out, we've by consensus we've done that. So we've done a little tidy up exercise offline to hopefully help the board with the rolling action list. Over to Kate.
Yeah, I mean, I did have a discussion, I did mention this within the matters arising, so I think it's much more clearer about the level of the work that's going to be taken forward with the officers to the IGB. The only thing that I would say is the annual report schedule. I think we need to have a look at that, some of our statutory planning, such as our Children's Services plan. I think that the intention is probably to bring this to the September IGB. That needs to be reflected. So there just needs a bit more tidying up within some of the statutory plans. But I hope that it gives you a better sense of the scheduling in of what we have to report on from a statutory basis and the business of the Health and Social Care Partnership.
Yeah, thanks, Kate. Colleagues, questions on the rolling action list or any comments? I don't see any questions or comments at this stage. I have got
Elizabeth, Alan.
There is that. Okay, I don't see that, but Elizabeth, thank you, Liz. Councillor Robertson.
Thanks, Chair. It's really just to thank you. Thanks. It's just to say thanks for action in that. It was something that kind of came out of discussions that we'd had, even in the IJB audit context as well. So just from a point of view of the audit committee being happy, it's good to say that's happened too.
Thank you. Thanks. There's just one area I might point out to the board. So, so the executive obviously offered to close some of the reports because some are on the agenda today. That will be the norm. Can I just ask, maybe just ask the Chief Officer to hold this in abeyance? So we've asked for the ideas project to be closed. Can we leave that in abeyance till we get to Kate's report at item 9? I had some concerns that the report that Kate offered us, which is quite fulsome in all the other areas, I wasn't, as a board member, fully assured that it delivered what was asked for about. The ask on the ideas report was whether to update on report on the local impact of investment by the end of the year. So it was about the impact of that programme. I know we spent nearly £300,000. So unless Kate wants to talk to that now, can we leave that till we get to Kate's report? That will come up naturally. And then if we as a board felt that it hadn't quite given us the assurance that we want, we'd leave it open. And if it has, then obviously we'll do as it is here and we'll mark it closed. It's really just one for myself and Diane to note when we get to that end how we're going to deal with that. If members are happy and Kate's happy, we'll leave that. I'll give Kate a word if she wants here. Kate.
No, I'm happy for that to happen.
Yeah, we'll pick it up at item 9. Thank you. So subject to any other comments, we're content that all those other items could be closed as they're on the agenda today. And the ones to do the ideas project, we'll just leave in abeyance till we get to that point. Thanks, Kate. Thanks for that. Let's move on then to item 6, which is an update report on the Lang Hill Clinic, and I'm going to ask Gail to talk to that.
Can I apologise? Gail, unfortunately, is not here today.
Right.
She's had a family bereavement, so I'm happy to take this report.
Thank you.
And give you an overview of it. So, the IGB were keen to have an overview around our visits, the various scrutiny bodies' visits to the mental health inpatients, and I think we brought about a report last year, but it looked at the broader system-wide responses either from the Mental Welfare Commission or Health Improvement Scotland. So we've brought this one relating to the visits that we've had on the 1st of February 2023, and we have actually had subsequent visits as earlier, just in the last 2 weeks too. So you can see that the unannounced visit actually showed that we've met a lot of our improvement actions, and the improvement actions are part of the report, and in many respects I think that we've completed the majority of them, and the only one is recommendation 2 to look at kind of psychological therapies. So there's a level of detail about what we're intending to do. We're quite satisfied about the outcome of the report. We had a subsequent follow-up by HIS, which was slightly different in its focus from the Mental Welfare Commission. So that was only a couple of weeks ago. And needless to say, some of the recommendations were more environmental around some of the changes that require to be undertaken within the unit. So we are feeling quite confident that we are meeting the recommendations that were outlined through the original report in 2021, and the outcome is positive. I think that some of the reports in terms of have yet to be published. I understand that they have not published the full report online yet. So the good thing is that we're meeting it. We've made the recommendations about reviewing care plans and access to our psychology engagement with carers, all the things that are really, really important for good quality care. So just asking the IJB to note the action plans and the progress that has been made, and that the fact that the majority bar one has been completed.
Thanks, Kate, for that comprehensive update. Thanks. I've got a question from Diana.
Hi, I'm sure one of the recommendations was to do with the lack of air conditioning and fresh air in the wards. And I can remember working in the IPCU as long ago as 2017, 2018, and you can't open the windows and there is no air conditioning that works in there. And it was an issue that was raised then, and we're now in 2023 and it's still not been addressed. I'm delighted that the Mental Welfare Commission think the patients are being treated well. I have to say the staff are still raising a lot of concerns, particularly about the training of the agency and locum staff that are built in. And I know the unions are speaking to Carol Fitzharris about it, so that there is action ongoing there. But it would be nice to know if there was any sort of deadline for when the air circulation in the wards was going to be sorted, not to mention the improvements to the garden so that people can't jump over the fence.
Thanks, Diana. So there were two questions there. One was about, I guess, the scrutiny around agency staff. The other one was about recommendation 7, I suspect, which is temperature regulation. Do you want to pick up either of those, Kate?
Yeah. So this report deals with the Mental Welfare Commission, Diana, and not the recent HIS. The Health Improvement Scotland picks up the issues around the buildings, not Mental Welfare Commission, and these issues have been identified and are progressing through the capital planning board around some of the requests. Certainly, that's something that we can chase up to see where that's sitting at. If I can recall, the HIS report hasn't been published as yet, but what I've seen from it, it wasn't a significant issue that was picked up. But I will go back and speak to the senior managers that were there on the visit that day. In terms of the issue about the use of locum and agency staff, that is the issue that we are across the board. And I think there's a plan in place. This is not about Inverclyde. This is about what the system looks like at this moment in time, either whether you're in health or in social care. But I understand it's something that the managers are addressing with staff side. So, and addressing with the leads for mental health.
Thanks, Kate. Diana.
The temperature regulation is mentioned in Appendix 1, Recommendation 7. But, if you're telling me that's by HIS, not by the Mental Welfare Commission, I'll take that on board. And I do know that the business of training agency staff is being tackled, but particularly so in Inverclyde because we have such a high usage of them.
Yeah.
Yeah, thanks, Diana. Kate, I wonder if, given looking at recommendation 7, it was one that caught my eye as well. I wonder if, we've said complete, or you offered complete, and what it's saying is that the States team has taken an options paper to consider how we might install something there. No time scale for works. I wonder if it might be more honest and fair for the board if that, rather than said complete, it might say in progress or something like that, something that allows us to say it's not yet physically complete, which I think is probably the point which Diana is raising in the way she has. So it's really whether the board is content to see recommendation 7 as accepting that work is complete when actually nothing started. Go ahead, please.
Yeah, I would rather that we went and checked that out, and Craig checked it out within the capital planning boards.
Okay, let's just minute it then we're going for recommendation 7 in the first appendix that we'll revisit the recommendation and the and how it's been scored, you know, the action at the end. Perhaps that can just feature in the minute to remind us that we discussed that, and we'll come back to that at a future time because it'll be in the minutes. Let's move on. Can we go to Christina, please?
Yeah, I was just pleased to see recommendation 3 about managers improving and formalising engagements with carers, because this is something that we find comes up again and again when carers are looking after someone with mental health issues, that their views are frequently not taken into account. I mean, heavens, the poor person with mental illnesses is saying, I'm taking my pills and everything's fine, and the carer who's dealing with them knows that they're not taking their pills and everything isn't fine. And it really is very, very important that their views are properly recorded and given the amount of credence that they deserve, because we do hear from time to time that that just isn't the case. And the other thing I was just interested in was recommendation 1 of the February 23 visit, where they're talking about the dietary requirements, and the action says it's addressed by the food users group. Now, I might have got this wrong. I thought the food users group might be a voluntary group. If that's the case, it is a voluntary group, then I don't think it's appropriate that they address it. I think it's appropriate that the management who are responsible for feeding these people address it, rather than say it's down to the food users group, if that is in fact a non-statutory group.
Thanks, Christina. I'll go back to Kate.
Christina, I would need to kind of seek some update from Carol Fitzharris, who's the manager. I would imagine that they would have a group that would be a group for people who live who are resident in the ward to have a view in that. It would be a participation group. There isn't such a thing as a statutory group for service users. The fact that they're there, and many are there on a statutory basis in terms of legislation. But if it is something that the IGB requires more clarification on around the use of, we will get an update for the next IGB.
Thank you.
Thanks, Kate. Thanks for picking that up. I'm going to move on to Councillor Robertson.
Thanks very much, Chair. So I'm looking at recommendation 2, if that's okay, from the July 2021, and obviously we've got a start date of May 23 there. We've obviously heard the progress of things over time, where we've had to change the grading of the proposed post, etc, etc. But I'm looking at the bottom, psychology cover to Lang Hills in place until safer recruitment is complete, with a start date of May 23. Obviously, I'm just wondering if there's a more up-to-date status on where we are with that.
No, but I will check that out on the basis that we have had real difficulties across the board in JGC recruiting to psychology, either within the community, in the wards, and normally that you can see that it was an 8A and it's been put up to an 8B, and they're hoping that it would be attractive. But we will get an update and provide that for the next IGB.
Thanks, Kate. If there are no other questions, I've got one. I don't see any other questions. So my question, Kate, is about recommendation 5. So we're jumping around here, putting you straight in the spot, I guess, but that's what we're here for. So recommendation 5 is about putting in place an audit system to ensure that consent for treatment certificates have been completed. It seems a fairly obvious recommendation when that assurance isn't there, and what we're saying is that the reviewing of patients' records will be addressed when there's ward rounds. I'm just wondering if that gives me enough assurance. I wondered if there might not need to be more in order to address the recommendation, which is to put an audit system in place. So I'll maybe ask you to respond to that. I had in my mind actually to ask Laura as well, who may be more familiar with, I guess, nursing space and audit systems. But it struck me that simply looking at cards at the ward round, to me, wasn't necessarily delivering the assurance that I was hoping to see around putting an audit system in place. So I'll maybe go to you first, Kate.
I actually think that's fair comment, Chair, and I think that it needs to be a bit more robust. So we'll go away and review that action and perhaps bring something back that assures a bit more diligence about how we sample, you know, as opposed to anyone checking that there is a consent to treatment certificates in place. So that would be about sampling and audit, well, audit and then sample.
Okay, so thank you for picking that. I wonder if, to help you out, because we've picked up a few things here, I wonder if the minute might just reflect that in Kate's chief officer update at the next board, rather than bring another report, because we know what the report says. Kate might just choose to take a paragraph in her report in June and say the board raised 3 issues which she wanted. One was about the dietary and food part. One was about the temperature regulation with the historical difficulties we've had there. And the third one was about an audit system around consent to treatment. I would suggest, Kate, that might be an easy way for the board to get the feedback that we need. But I'll defer it to you. It just looks like a solution that might be an easy thing to do, rather than bring back further reports at another time.
I think that would be an ideal way to do it, Chair.
Thanks, Kate. So let's reflect that in the minute, Diane. We'll just, so that Kate is reminded to bring those things back to the next board. Brilliant. Helpful to see that report. Thank you very much. Helpful to see that there have been those two reviews. I think, as Kate reminded us, certainly the second report hadn't come out yet. There is an action plan there, which I expect Appendix 2 will get developed over time. It's relatively high level at the moment, no dates and things like that yet. But helpful to see that broad assurance around how officers are providing the oversight for that. But a few areas I think that we just like to tighten down on, and those were the ones that were mentioned. I see Diana now wants another question, so I will stop there. Diana?
It wasn't a question so much as you were asking what a food users group was. And unless they've changed their title, it's a group mostly of nursing staff who serve the meals to the patients, maybe one from each ward. And they meet up with the catering staff and dietary staff to discuss patients' meals and the nutritional value, unless it's changed since I last worked in a ward.
Okay, thanks for that. That's helpful to know that it's the professional staff, the nursing staff that are foremost to that group. Thank you. So with that in mind, can I ask you just to take a quick look, and are we content to approve the recommendations at 21A, B, and C for item 6? Thank you very much. That moves us nicely on to item 7, which is an item we've taken a number of update reports over time. It's another report on the impact of our primary care improvement plan work. And I'm going to ask Alan Best to lead off. I'm conscious, I think, that I've got both. Well, Alan, go ahead.
Thank you, Chair. Yes, as you say, there's been a number of papers that's previously come to the IJB. This paper, and apologies, it's a bit more of a weighty paper this time of detail. This is about the impact of the Primary Care Improvement Plan, the PCIP. And the purpose of this report is to demonstrate the impact of the PCIP through the advancement of our HSEP's multidisciplinary workforce and how this contributes to the progression of the transformation of primary care services, with a focus on allowing our GP colleagues to focus on the expert medical general role of dealing with more complex issues with service users, patients. The recommendations of the paper is to note the positive impact on patient care through the delivery of the PCIP, and for the IJB to agree for the continued implementation of the Primary Care Improvement Plan. Probably what I'd like for the IJB is to note in section 6, where we summarise some of the impact, especially around 0.65, where we'd like to kind of highlight the work in terms of the transfer of vaccinations has seen the largest workload patient care shift in terms of general practice. The very important work our community link workers have done in terms of their increased activity, thus reducing the need for GP involvement in social care elements. And I think that's been very pertinent in the current areas around fuel poverty and cost of living. Our advanced nurse practitioner roles have provided an alternative to home visits, again reducing the need for GP visits. Our community treatment and care services have enhanced and expanded the number of activities that are given to our community and placing them within our 3 health centre areas with practice nurses. This allows practice nurses and GPs to allow them to focus more on complex care. And our advanced physiotherapist model, although limited, has allowed patients to seek more specialised treatments in musculoskeletal conditions. Again, this is freeing up the GP time and allowing them to focus more on complex issues. I'm happy to take any questions. Thank you.
Thanks, Alan. What I was going to say at the start, I just got word tie, was I'm sure both I saw Hector earlier on and Laura on the call. So before we go to questions, I might just ask first Hector and then Laura if they wanted to add anything. It's an area, obviously, their professional space. Hector.
To be honest, I think Alan covered that quite nicely. I mean, I think that, as Alan identified at the beginning, the purpose in this paper really was the previous reports we've done up to now really were about the ethos and the delivery of the paper. But I think members had commented in the past that it would be useful to see exactly what impact the introduction of this programme has had, and I think this paper demonstrates that and shows exactly what the different elements of the primary care improvement plan are, and how they're impacting on GPs and their staff. So I'd commend the paper in that respect.
Thanks, Hector. Laura, is anything you want to add?
I don't think there's much more to add from me, really. I guess it's nice to see the paper starting to show the outcomes, but for me, there's still a lot of ongoing work with a lot of this, and I think this is going to be, areas that we're continuing to work on. Particular work I've been involved in around the advanced nurse practitioners, which has been very difficult because we've just got ongoing recruitment issues, and every time we feel like we're really getting somewhere with getting people trained, unfortunately, they tend to move on, which is an issue nationally, and definitely not just for us or for Glasgow. However, many of them have stayed somewhere in the Inverclyde system, which is good, obviously.
Yeah, thanks, Laura. I'm going to come back to that question of AMPs later, so hold that thought unless it comes up. So I've got a first question from Councillor McCluskey-Martin.
Thanks, Alan. And thanks to the team for this report. It's really helpful in understanding the range of things that we're dealing with under this primary care improvement plan. I also had a question on ANPs, but I might leave that if Alan's going to cover that later. I'll ask 2 other questions that I had on the paper. The first is just around budgets. We obviously discussed at an earlier meeting the Scottish Government's decision to cut, I think it was 60 million from the primary care improvement plan budget for the financial year that ended in April. So I've got kind of 2 questions on that. The first is, what impact, I know we spoke at the time about the possible impact it could have had. I'm just wondering what impact it ultimately did have, that in-year budget cut for 22-23. And then secondly, in regards to paragraph 3.8 in the paper, what we are expecting from the Scottish Government in terms of funding for this current financial year, because perhaps you could just give me a bit of clarity on this. I'm looking at 3.8 and I'm reading that as we don't have clarity on the budget for the financial year we're in at the moment. So it would just be good to understand that more clearly. The second question is just around vaccines, which is obviously something we've had a discussion about both here and at the prior Health and Social Care Committee of the Council. And it's quite a comprehensive report in section 5 on vaccines, but I'm not seeing anything about some of the vaccine areas that were covered at earlier meetings where people were having to travel out of area. So specifically, I'm thinking of vaccines for respiratory illnesses where lots of people were having to go to Glasgow to get vaccines that were previously available in their GP surgeries in Inverclyde. I'm just wondering if I could have an update on that situation, and do we now have capacity locally to meet that demand? The number given previously at a previous IJB meeting was about 300 people had to travel out of area, and I'm just wondering if there's an update on that number, or hopefully it's gone down. Thanks very much.
Thanks, Martin. So I'll go back to Alan Best first, but I will ask maybe Hector or Laura if there's anything they can add to, or if Alan hasn't quite got what you're after. So Alan first.
Yeah, to answer your first question, we've just literally on Friday submitted our Q4 tracker to the Scottish Government, and that is in line with all the other HSEPs in Glasgow and Clyde and across the country nationally. That will allow the Scottish government and ourselves to do a fair bit of analysis about where we stand, and that will then formulate how the discussions around funding for this coming year will come in place. So we're still not a sort of fully kind of answer to that question about where the funding will lie. From our point of view, we have the funding available to do and to continue the work we've done to date in the major areas that we're in the memorandum of understanding. But we do recognise there's areas within that we could do more around about pharmacy services and the advanced physiotherapy service. So if more funding or additional funding became available, these are the areas we'd want to focus. The current funding we have just now allows us to cover the major areas that we committed to. So at the moment, unless Craig has we've been given a letter since Friday, the last quarter report that we've put into the Scottish Government, that will be analysed, and I think we're still probably a couple of months down the line before we get anything concrete from that. But we did meet with the Scottish Government 2 weeks ago, and again we put forward a very strong case about the areas of work that we still needed to progress, and in some cases some areas that sort of previous funding have we continued we
Okay, I think you got some of that, Martin. I think he was coming to a conclusion. I'm not sure Alan picked up the issue about the impact of the budget cutting year, which we could return to. Alan, we kind of lost you there. I'm not going to ask you to repeat that, but I wonder if you might put the camera off of that, if that helps the much as we like to look at it, might help your signal. Alan, thank you for that. I'm going to ask Martin maybe to come back. We missed a little bit of the end part of that, but I'm getting the sense that what you're telling us is that the budget position going forward is far from clear. And therefore we need to note that. I think we know that, but it's unlikely, I suspect, that we'll get no resources for this. It would be daft to have a cliff edge, but daft things happen. But it doesn't sound like that. It sounds like you're still in negotiation for this year's budget, but it's not clear what resources that you're going to turn over. It's obvious to me and others, I think, that if you get more resources, then you can do more stuff in the space that you're trying to take, either try to develop new offerings for service users or take some heat off the GP practice itself. I didn't quite catch whether you had said anything about I think Martin asked about what the in-year impact was of the budget cut we had. I didn't pick up, maybe we lost that, but I wonder if you might return to that one, Alan, if you can pick that up.
Yeah, apologies about the lost connection there. Yeah, just very briefly, the funding that we have just now, as I say, allows us to continue for the major areas we need to continue. The areas, if we were additional funding, would be around expanding our pharmacy services and the advanced physiotherapy services. These are the two areas. There's further work that we can do should additional funding become available, and certainly that's where we would focus our attention.
And one other area that Martin mentioned was, I think it was really what sort of vaccination services have been offered locally, or is it still the case that a majority of folk in Inverclyde are having to go to Glasgow for a variety of vaccination services that hitherto we would expect to be offered locally? So it was a little update on how our vaccination services are functioning and how local that is. Okay.
In terms of the vaccination service, there are still some ad hoc vaccinations that service users do need to go to the central vaccination service. We do continue to push to recognise that Inverclyde is a geographical difference from other areas of Greater Glasgow Clyde Health Board. What we have done is we have very much spent a lot of time developing and making sure that our housebound team has become quite robust in terms of its area of coverage, so that anybody who has got any difficulties through either health issues or accessibility issues, to ensure that they're seen locally by our housebound team, or where possible within a location. But unfortunately there are still some members of the community who need to travel, and we continually highlight that as part of the vaccination transformation programme. But what I'm able to give the IGIB assurance, where anybody highlights an issue about receiving a vaccination, our housebound team, as they always do, stand up to the plate and ensure that our community is supported as best as we can. But it is an area of work that we'll continue to push the cause in terms of Inverclyde.
Thanks, Alan. I'll just get Martin to hang on. So I know Craig wants to say something. It's probably about a question that Martin's asked. So I'll go to Craig and then I'll come back. Craig.
Through yourself, Chair. It's just to say, in terms of the funding for the primary care improvement plan, we will know the final outcome of that for our draft accounts, or is pretty much there for it, which are due at the end of June. So I suppose it's just to say, when we're preparing the accounts and when we're doing the narrative behind it, we'll make sure we give as much detail as we possibly can, if there was any in-year cut, etc., anything like that was involved in it. So it's just to say that this information should be all available for us for our next IGIB.
Thanks, Craig. There's quite a lot in this. Let me just offer again, Hector or Laura, any perspective they want to offer before we go back to Councillor McCluskey. Hector.
No, I think Alan's covered it. Yeah, I mean, I think the issue about that, as Alan said, there are still some patients having to travel for some ad hoc vaccinations. That's those that are not within a pre-agreed programme, such as a COVID or flu programme. As you mentioned, Councillor McCluskey, those that are maybe needing individual vaccines arranged on the recommendation of hospital clinics, for example. And there is still work ongoing to try and ensure that that is eventually delivered in Inverclyde. But no, you're absolutely right. It's not all being done here at the moment.
Thanks, Hector. Laura, I'm sure we're good. What, Laura?
Yeah, nothing else to add from me.
Thank you. That takes me back to Martin. Martin, did you want to come back on any of that, or pick a thread that maybe of some of the responses you've had?
No, that's been very helpful. Thank you. I think on the point on vaccines, I think this was first raised when we spoke about it. It was last August, and I'd hope that by the time we get to this August, that the numbers would be down. And I think it would be useful, whether it's in a future paper or whether it's in a note circulated to the board, if we could see an update on the numbers, as compared to what we received. I think it was in August 2022, just to understand what that problem looks like, because I know that most of these vaccines named in here will be being provided locally, because, like as Hector said, they're part of a pre-agreed programme like COVID or flu. But it does feel like a reduction in the service available to patients in Inverclyde, when they used to be able to get this on their doorstep, and now they're having to travel for it. So it would be good to understand how we're going to return to a point where all of these vaccines can be provided locally. And with regards to the funding, that's also very helpful. I think it would be good if the government could maybe pick up their speed. We know the pressures that are on primary care at the moment, and the fact that we still don't have certainty on our budget for this year, when there is obviously so much need, is a little bit concerning. But I know that's not the problem of our officers. I know that's the problem of the government. Thank you.
Thanks, Martin. So I'll maybe offer it back to Alan Best and the Chief Officer. I mean, there's probably two thoughts here. One is that we do get a fairly regular update on our primary care improvement plan. So twice a year normally, at least. So we're going to see this again, I've no doubt. And maybe I could ask just Alan and Kate to give some thoughts of what would be the best way to continue to focus on this, whether we wait the next update, or whether either through Kate's update report at a future IGB, either in August or possibly November, Martin, which kind of meets with your cycle of annuality. So maybe November, maybe a short paragraph specifically on the update on the vaccination programme, with a focus, I suspect, on those areas where people are still having to travel, and what we're doing to try and improve on that. And I say that because in the report at page 5351, it's clearly we're still looking at the feasibility of the local delivery model. I think we've said that before. So we'd want to go beyond that and understand what it is that's the block for that, or whether it's resources, no providers, not enough folk to make it worth the system. You know, with the best will in the world, if it's a handful of people, we're probably not going to bespoke something. So having a better understanding around that is probably something that we will return to. So a question is whether we do it in the periodic cycle, or whether the Chief Officer and Alan bring something back at a different time. And I'm sensing that might be either September the earliest, or maybe the November board, somewhere around there, just to focus on that. So we'll capture that in a minute, and we'll make sure we don't lose sight of that. Thanks, Martin. Are there any other questions before the chair asks his? Simon.
Thanks very much, Chair, and thanks, Alan, for your report. I had 2 points around about the impact summary. Yeah, and the first is at 6.1, where the report talks about a primary care reform survey was issued in March 22. And I'm kind of wondering, is that a typo? It should be March 23?
Thank you. No, I believe that will be 22, but I can get that checked out.
Thanks, Alan. It's just if it was March 22, I would have hoped to see a kind of summary report coming back. Have I missed that?
That's something I can follow up on and get that sort of information to yourself.
I think it'd be helpful to do that, because it would complement the work that we've done at this end, which I think is really good and it looks really positive. So I'd be interested to see that report coming back. The other kind of point is what do patients say about it? It's really kind of touching on what Martin was talking about earlier. You know, have the patients said anything? Are they saying anything to the GPs? Are they saying anything to you?
Could I briefly come in and then perhaps Hector, Chair?
Yeah, of course, please, Alan.
Yeah, no, it's a very good point. Thank you. And we'd really value our community's voice, and that's why we're actually doing a piece of work as part of the expanded primary care improvement work, about having conversations supported by your voice about getting feedback. I think our population realise that the way that health is delivered now in terms of accessing some services changed, some of it through the use of digital technology, telephone consultations, and also the multidisciplinary teamwork. But that's a piece of work is ongoing to give confidence to our community about how services are delivered. So that's something that we're very keen to get feedback. And Laura has been and her team have been a stalwart in terms of the what matters to you and the care opinion work, that we're getting very valuable real-time information back from patient service users and their carers. So again, that's a bit that we focus in on. And certainly in future papers could bring back some of the actual direct comments from our community.
Yes, I'd be very interested. Thank you, Alan. Thanks for your report.
Thanks, Simon. Hector, was there something you wanted to say about the GP survey? Or the primary care survey, to be fair.
Just a few small things. So it was yeah, I can just confirm that was definitely March 22, because this paper was originally written for the previous IGB, so it would have been written before March 22. So therefore, no, it was definitely last year the national survey was undertaken. And Alan kind of stole my thunder, because I was going to mention care opinion and what matters to you. I suppose Simon mentioned just what are GPs finding, so I suppose I can tell you on the whole, you know, obviously it's a time of great change for patients, but you know, mostly we're having, I can say anecdotally, because that's the opinions we're getting back and the comments we're getting back are really quite positive about the other services, to the extent that a lot of individuals are actually sometimes phoning us and asking to see one of the other individuals, saying they helped me before, can I see them again? And that applies to you. We're going to ask about ANPs, but it applies to our ANPs as well as our community links workers and our pharmacists. So but that's anecdotal, but anecdotal is obviously part of the feedback. But as Alan and mentioned, you know, just the other more formal ways of getting feedback coming through as well.
Thanks, Hector. Thanks, Simon. I might just add as well, there was something I picked up this spring, that there was a local actually local across the 6 HSCP areas to Glasgow. There was a local consultation, public consultation, I think just before Easter, on pretty much online. So it was a link and a questionnaire, and it was put out on, I guess, the various platforms and various electronic media. And it was asking the public a variety of questions. I can't remember if it wasn't specific to GPs. I think it was primary care services in each of the 6 areas, which the health board extended by a few days because it bridged Easter when folk were probably not that interested in doing questionnaires. So it did go on for a little bit longer than they'd intended. So there may well be downstream a little bit of knowledge or learning or data or feedback that we might be able to leverage in when that work is published. So I'll make sure that I keep my ear to the ground with the folks that have got that up at Glasgow at the Health Board. I had a question about the ANPs, which is probably Laura. It really was Laura. So it was 5-4, and I know that you'd highlighted how difficult it was to retain highly skilled nurses in these areas. I just wonder if you might just give us a little bit better understanding of that. I know we're trying to get to something like 6.5 whole-time equivalents, and we're less than 2. Give me an idea in terms of time. How long do you think it might take for us to get to, a fairly full cadre of advanced enough practitioners? And I guess the second part of the question is, can you give me an idea of when we get to 5 or 6, what sort of impact is that likely to make on the overall workload? What sort of things will they be able to do at that point that we can't do now unless folks see a GP?
Thanks, Chair. Happy to pick those up. I think in terms of how long will it take us to get a full team, that is a totally impossible question for me to give you an answer to. I can only give you an honest answer, which is every time we nearly get there, we seem to lose staff. And the issue that we have with recruitment and retention of these staff is they go through a very, very intensive training programme, which takes a significant amount of time. They're heavily supported by the team lead and our GP colleagues. So it's quite a hard programme for them to go through, but they go through this significant amount of work, and then they're very well qualified professionals who can essentially get a higher level of remuneration going to work for privately or for GP practices. So quite often that's exactly what happens, is that we work to train them up, and then they move on to something else. We have recently had a couple of practitioners as well who have qualified, done some of the modules, but at that point said, you know what, this is a significant amount of work, and we have decided that we want to return to district nursing or wherever they came from. So as I say, you're not necessarily losing the knowledge base because these practitioners may be going into your GPs or coming back to the service, but it is very difficult. In terms of us ensuring that we do everything we can for these staff's health-being to support them, they do get study time. They get a quite high amount of study time given to them. We do make sure that they're supported, that they get clinical supervision. Our GP colleagues support them. And I say they have a team lead in place. And actually, we led a clinical training session out at McGowan Hospice for all of the AMPs across the whole of GGC a few months ago. So we are working very, very hard to support these individuals and do anything we can to make sure that we do keep them, but it is very difficult. In terms of the impact, I think it would be fair to say, and Hector might want to comment as well, that the full-time and trained staff that we have are making a very good impact. They are taking significant work away from our GP colleagues. However, when they're all busy training up other staff as well, that impact is smaller. So we would be seeing more of the same in terms of them taking home visits from GP colleagues, seeing patients out in care homes. So it would be about the same impact, but on a greater scale, if we could get this team absolutely up to speed. We work across GGC with the AMP lead and with the universities working with these courses. And as I say, there is nothing, we're not in a different position from anyone else, other than I'd say we probably put in significantly more support to try and keep this team. Alan, Hector, I'm not sure if there's anything I've missed there that you'd want to add.
I mean, thanks, Laura. You've given us an honest and candid response, which I guess we probably know. But what it's certainly telling me is that we shouldn't have any early hope or expectation that the recruitment of 5 or 6 AMPs is coming along soon. Were that to be the case, it would have a significant impact in areas that we are looking to employ them. But there's no easy answer to this. I'm going to go back to Hector, I think, who wants to just contribute. Hector.
Yeah, I think Laura's covered most of what I was going to say. I mean, I think the starting remit for this way back at the beginning was to try and achieve sort of about 40 to 50% of GP visits being done by our ANP team. And, you know, I think with full complement that is possible. I think the reason we've set that level of target is because as GPs, there are still a lot of the visits that are important for us to do, and those are the more complex cases that we've talked about, palliative care, etc. Although our ANPs actually do cover those areas as well, but you know, these are the sort of more complex needs that we would want to cover. So that would be the aim. I think other changes that you mentioned when, you know, if we do get up to full complement is to ensure that to have a sort of more you know, geographical based, sort of hub-based models, so that the ANPs aren't necessarily working by each general practice, but covering an area of Inverclyde, so they can respond more readily, and so maybe covering patients from several practices at once, but responding maybe one ANP covering part of Gourock, another covering part of Port Glasgow, and being able to respond more quickly when calls come in. And I suppose just to go back to what Laura was saying at the beginning, really, I suppose we're not just competing often against other primary care areas within our own board, but out throughout Scotland, but we're also competing against you know, secondary care as ANP roles are expanding there as well, in terms of specialist nursing taking over some of the roles that consultants have previously done in hospital, or junior doctors. So there's a lot of choice out there for ANPs in where they go. I suppose it's not all. I suppose it depends how you look at it. I mean, I suppose from the strategic point of view, as the clinical director, as Laura said, sometimes we lose the ANPs to other parts of primary care, including the GP practices. And from our point of view, that does help sustain the GP practices and improves the stability and sustainability of the practices locally, which I guess if we have to lose these staff, losing them there is, you know, is not the worst place we could lose them to. And so it does make things, I guess, better for the local area if we are losing these staff, that they're at least being kept within our area and providing that expertise locally. But it is frustrating when you have that conveyor belt and you're taking the time to train and then you're losing them. But I can live with it a bit easier when I know they're going to work locally still.
Hector, thanks. Laura, also thank you, and Alan Best for also contributing to this. I think Simon's got a question. Might make that the last. Simon.
Sorry, Chair, I just haven't taken my hand down.
Okay, okay.
It's down now.
It's down now. Thank you. Hugely important subject. I know we normally come back to this every 6 months. So thank you to Alan Best for bringing the paper. Thank you for the variety of examples that you've given in the paper and some of the areas where we've got some areas of success. I think we've had a reasonably a good discussion about the vaccination issue. That tends to come up fairly often. We will return to that, as I've said, in the near future. We have talked about funding. We've talked about understanding what the patient's view. Hector gave us a GP view of how it's going, but also trying to understand what the consumer is feeling about this, and are there any areas that we might be able to weave into our thinking there. There is probably a little bit of follow-up around the survey. Hector confirmed it was last year's. Simon, quite keen to see that. So if it's possible to flesh out that at a future IJB, perhaps a summary of the thinking that was informed that survey might be helpful. And I think the last thing is we've had a fairly fruitful discussion here about ANPs, how difficult it is to not just recruit, but actually, I probably recruit is probably the easier of the two, but to retain over the long term and begin to make an impact locally. I think, as Hector's reminded us, if we lose them to somewhere else in the system, it's not the worst of all outcomes. So we note that as well. So with that in mind, and a fairly a widespread discussion, my colleagues are probably happy to note the recommendations at 2122. Thanks very much. I'm confident we'll get finished by 4, so I would normally give you a break now, but I think we can push on and get over the line. So the last substantive paper on this side of the agenda is item 8. It's an update on the Learning Disability Community Hub. And again, I'm talking this out to give Alan Best just another moment to catch his breath, because he's picking this one up again. Alan Best.
Thank you, Chair. Yes, this is again an update for the IGIB in terms of the Learning Disability Community Hub. The purpose of the report is to describe some of the ongoing development of the Community Hub project, and in terms of the design stages towards market testing and financial close, with a summary of the key risks included within the report. What, in terms of the recommendation to the IGIB, it's to note the current progress of the delivery programme, and to note the ongoing review and design proposals and the affordability gap position, including the inherent inflation risks. Also to note the ongoing engagement with the relevant Scottish Government officials on the maintenance of the external funding. Probably the two main areas I'd like to point the board towards is section 3.5, which is in terms of a timeline, which I think is particularly useful. We've talked about the hub for a fairly considerable period of time now in terms of communication with our community. 3.5 gives a timeline, still subject to some change, but it shows where we are in the stages just now, where we've now moved into the hub stage 2 in terms of actually moving towards the potential actual proverbial kind of shovel in the ground sort of question in terms of towards the end of 2023, maybe in the autumn time. So 3.5 gives you that sort of timeline. The other area, just to confirm with the IGIB, is in terms of section 3.8, and that is in terms of the vacant and derelict land improvement programme, and that's to confirm that the funding that externally was coming has that's been approved. Happy to take any questions.
Yeah, thanks, Alan. Open for questions, colleagues. Questions? I'm finding it hard to believe there are no questions. It sounds like there are no questions. Alan, I wanted to pick up a couple of things. One is on the cover paper. It's a minor thing, but I'm just wondering if this is a paper that went to the council or something. The cover paper's got 20th of March. Is that a typo, or is that just an old paper? Or?
That's a typo. I do apologise to that. That's
okay.
A typo. Okay. Apologies.
I wasn't quite sure if I'd gone to a different. I'd gone to the board. So I'm not seeing any questions. I'll maybe just make a point about the timeline. So it's obvious to me that when we look at 3.5, that the board will gain either the assurance it needs, or it'll crystallise the risk that we are either carrying, or will need to look for a way to mitigate in or around September when we get to financial close with this issue. So an issue that's we've had long discussions about, and we took some special decisions, I think, at the middle last year, summertime last year, in order to get the additional funding for this programme. Really, I know the board supports the idea that we develop this LD hub and that we get it built. But what's clear to me is that we'll know in around September. So if not for our September board, then certainly for our November board, we'll know very clearly what any additional financial challenge might be. And I guess at that point, we'll have to return to whether we make decisions about this programme. So it does run some risk. So helpful for Alan to point that out. So subject to no other questions, I'm happy to let this rest. Let me thank Alan for picking that subject up, for bringing that one back as well today, and for just giving us a clear view about what the timeline looks like. And as I say, when the board will be asked, I suspect, to make further decisions, that to me looks like somewhere between September and November this coming year. Thanks for that, Alan. Really grateful. So are we therefore content just to note the recommendations which are made at 2.1? We are. Thank you very much. So that takes us on to the Chief Officer's update, which is at item 9. I'll just hand that back to Kate. Kate.
Thank you, Chair. So if I kind of just take you through, we've got quite a few things to report this time. I thought that the IGB would be interested to hear about the visit of the Cabinet Secretary to Inverclyde. Now, I appreciate it wasn't to us in the Health and Social Care Partnership, but to one of our partners in Bagatelle Care Home. And that provoked a series of inquiries with the Cabinet Secretary about some of our strategy within Health and Social Care Partnership in Inverclyde. And I think one of the things that he was curious about is the importance of our relationships. So across the system, we have a whole systems approach, and actually we have very strong relationships with our cared for, their families, and the providers that provide care. And one of the things that we outlined was our strategic vision, which is in our strategic plan, about to make sure that our people live in their own homes for as long as it's safe to do so. And we've seen a significant change in our balance of care as a result of that. And we did advise that we're continuing to take that forward, and that we'll be strengthening services, particularly around the redesign of our social care workforce over the next year, and to allow that for people to stay at home much longer. I think one of the key areas that was highlighted was our development of interim beds. So there was a curiosity of whether we were using interim beds in Inverclyde. There's been some concerns raised nationally about the underutilisation, but Inverclyde, in reviewing their winter plan from 2021 in April, and we're just about to do that again, identified the need for intern beds, and as a result, that even without the Scottish Government funding, we were ahead of the game in that one, and we were utilising it from very early on in October, when the funding was only start to become released in December and January. So you can see that on a contractual basis, that we purchase more beds on a spot purchase basis at an enhanced rate. And just we recognised that this year has been one of the most exceedingly challenging years across the system that I've ever remembered. But actually, despite our significant issues with our workforce, and particularly around our recruitment and retention of our social care workforce, we have met in the main the target that's set with GG&C of 10 delayed discharges, and comfortably some days, and some days just on the line, very rarely above that. So I think that's a huge amount of recognition for the team, and particularly for Joyce and Alan Best and Alan Brown about the delivery of that. So I think that because of that, we got very positive feedback from Scottish Government about our approach. I think one of the things that I wanted to highlight was, which is an opportunity but also a significant challenge for us, is the Health and Care Staff in Scotland Act. And if you can think about where we are now, and I think the Act has got is well intentioned in trying to seek the support and ensuring that we are keeping and supporting our staff across the board. And it's got the two overarching provisions, which is in the main to the purposes of staffing is to provide safe, high quality services and the best outcomes, and on a duty on NHS and social care providers to make sure that there will be suitably qualified and competent staff working in the right numbers. Now, you can appreciate how difficult this Act is going to be taken forward. It's been enacted and it's due to be implemented, bearing in mind the conversation that we've had throughout this IGB today about recruitment and retention. So the full commencement of the Act will be in April 2024, so we have got a year lead-in time for health boards, and the Executive Board Nurse Director in the board has agreed that GG&C will become a test site for 9 of the health focus chapters. We felt that was really helpful, because with GG&C, NHS GG&C being one of the biggest health boards, it will give us a real-time analysis about the possibilities and the impact. For the NHS and social care services, Health Improvement Scotland are doing it for NHS and the Care Inspectorate, respectively for social care. And I actually think that's the bit, for the social care, that's the bit that's going to be the trickiest. Because whilst that we have workforce and we have workloads, indicators across in health, around job sizing, etc., that is really underdeveloped in social care. So it'll be interesting to see about what that will look like from the Care Inspectorate that are supposed to be developing this, and I suppose that there is a need, there's a wish for a national digital tool, and I think that a lot of that is about the escalating costs that tool will cost. So where we are within JJ&C is that Laura will be our lead, and particularly in Inverclyde, our lead for within the board, but I'm keen to start joining all of this up. And while JJC, from an NHS point of view, will do some of the work around this, I've asked for the other 5 local authority elements, social care elements, that we contribute to this as 6 local authority areas, bearing in mind that the responsibility for staffing lies with the Chief Social Work Officer and is a delegated, who has a delegated function from the council. So we're keen to make sure that we don't get into a fragmented approach around the health and social care, the implementation of these standards, or understanding what that looks like. We will no doubt update you and give regular updates as to the work as the work commences, and I think that'll show you some of the strengths but some of the weaknesses that are currently in place in developing and implementing this very important legislation. So I see, Diane, I'm conscious that I've been running through these 2 items and I haven't asked for questions. Diane, do you want to?
That's my prerogative, Kate.
I know.
So I see Diana has her hand up for a bit. Let's pause there for a second because there may be a couple. So Diana, go ahead, and Christina. We all want to push on with Kate's report, but let's take those 2 items, Diana and then Christina.
I'm assuming as this has implications for staff across GGC and in Inverclyde, that there'll be work with the staff side trade unions in health and social care at area level and probably locally as well.
I would imagine so, Diana. I don't know the detail of it yet. It's just starting to get discussed, but I would imagine you couldn't put in safe staffing or staffing without involving staff side.
I'm fairly confident there'll be, given the importance of this legislative change, that there'll be the full consultation process with staff and engagement. I say that as a previous chair of staff governance and having been involved with the AHP and the staff side partnership and stuff before. So pretty confident that the staff side will not be blinded to any of this. Christina.
This is more a comment really, and it's not anything that we can do about. I mean, to be perfectly honest, I think this Act of Parliament's a bit of buck passing. Now, you cannot put in adequate staffing levels unless you have sufficient nurses there to begin with, and the provision for nurse training was cut back a number of years ago. I mean, this also goes to why you can't get any advanced nurse practitioners. If you had had a bigger pool of nurses to pull from in the first place, who were at lower and middle ranks, had their training not been cut, you then would not be in the position where it's almost impossible to recruit and retain all the nurse practitioners. So, you know, this is a kind of back to front thing that's been done. And in terms of the social work people, social services, and the people for care at home, it's a demographic problem in specific that we have here. Our population is aging. We don't have so many younger people. if our younger people go off to university and better trained and highly paid jobs, there is no way that they are going to go into the social care services. They're just not going to do that at a basic grade, you know. So I think this Act, eventually it may be used as a stick to beat us with, and it's not our fault if we cannot comply with this Act. The reason we can't comply is because of decisions taken by the government in previous years, and then we get blamed for it, and I just don't think it's fair.
Thanks for the observation, Christina. It's noted. I'm going to ask Laura, who I know that safe staffing is nothing new. I know that the Act is new, but the actual process of safe staffing is not anything alien to healthcare, and I'm presuming it's probably not alien to social care either. But my experiences with the health side, I'm just going to ask Laura to say something about her role here and how she expects it to sort of roll forward. Laura.
Thank you very much for bringing me in. Yeah, I listened to all the comments and definitely I agree with some of it. And, you know, nursing wise, we know that the World Health Organization is saying we will be 9 million nurses short by 2030, which is actually only a stone's throw away in reality. So this Act does not say thou shall have X number of nurses at every bed. It talks much more about how we work to make sure we have the right nurses in the right place at the right time, and how we work to ensure that is safe. And I think there's a lot here about efficiency and focus, and that board level escalation from wards up to board level, and making sure that those conversations are there, and that staff have the ability to say when they do not feel that they are qualified enough, or there aren't enough staff on duty. So I think there's a lot of aspects to it. In terms of the rollout of it, there is a lot of work going on across Scottish Government at the moment, and there's webinars coming out. We are going to have champions trained locally. We already do for the community nursing side of this. Adult nursing and children's nursing will be getting trained very soon. And what we're doing is anything that comes through, we are making sure that we share it myself across to Jonathan as Chief Social Worker, but also with our planning colleagues, so getting that workforce conversation going as well. So from my point of view, I see myself as very much a conduit here between all the work that's going on in Greater Glasgow and Clyde with the Executive Nurse Director, Prof Angela Wallace, and the team there that are helping to roll this out, and looking at how we locally are able to roll this out, but also feedback and influence this. Part of being a pilot for me is part of how you influence and we make sure that this is rolled out as effectively as possible to make sure that we maximise the outcomes for our patients. That's what this is all about, and I think we've got to stick with that.
Laura, thanks, and Kate, thanks for including it in the first part of your update. I'm grateful for that update, and I know we'll return to this subject at a future time. I'm also confident, certainly on the health side, that safe staffing is something that, for example, the staff governance and other areas look at on a regular basis. So there's nothing new in the health element of this. It may be slightly different in social care. I don't have as much experience there. Kate, I might ask you to move on if you're happy. You've got a few topics yet to cover, so I'll give you back the microphone.
Thank you, Chair, and apologies for cutting over you.
No worries.
Just to come back on, to move on around that, we got notification from the Care Inspector through who advised all local authorities of their intention to take a thematic review of the experiences of disabled children and young people over a period of a year from May 2023. This has likely been a focus as a result of the impact that the pandemic has had disproportionately on disabled children, particularly neurodiverse, and the impact of them. So, using a rights-based approach, the review will provide a national overview of the contribution of social work to how well disabled children and young people's needs are assessed, planned for and met. The review will also consider wellbeing and rights through child-centred planning and bespoke support. And Jonathan, who as the Chief Social Work Officer is in constant contact with the Care Inspector around what our contribution may well look like from Inverclyde. I do not think that we've been asked to be one of the 4 implementation sites for it, but we will have to contribute It is because it is a national review, so that will require a bit of work on our part. The next bit is kind of linked to this, interestingly enough. So when we did some analysis around the impact when I first came into post, we could see disproportionately that our children in our own care homes were struggling with their emotional and mental well-being, and we were seeing that particularly children in kinship and our foster carers were having some level of crisis around their mental health. So we have put a post in specifically that will target psychological interventions for these young people, but will help the staff to kind of manage and contain some of the impact of the children's and young people's mental health on themselves and within their care setting. So the recruitment is currently underway and will include the participation of our children and young people in the selection process as to who that person will be, and data. We're keen to collect the data to evidence the impact of the post, and we would like a wider conversation with NHS Greater Glasgow and Clyde, particularly now that this is a function of East Dunbartonshire, if it proves to be successful in terms of the outcomes of the interventions and the impact for children. We're also keen to look at this approach as we move forward in terms of the redesign of children's services. So it is our intention within Inverclyde is to strengthen our integration within children's services to ensure that we're making the greatest impact. Are you happy for me to move on?
Yeah, please.
Yep.
Thank
So medically assisted treatment, which is called the MAT treatment, the MAT standards, we were not doing so well about a year ago, but you can see that we have significantly improved, and we've moved from amber to green, from MAT standards 1 to 5. And unfortunately, I think that we had a look at 6 to 10. We are hopeful, and even though the ADP, the MIS team came out to see us at the end of April, unfortunately I haven't had an update because of a bereavement issue, but I understand that there was a high likelihood that we would achieve our green status. So that is quite significant from where we started from, that we're probably sitting with the 10 MAT standards and we're meeting all of these standards and that they're green. But I'll get that confirmed about the visit that was at the end of April, because I haven't had any feedback formally. And the last thing is the inspection across Hill Children's House. We had a very good inspection. However, our young people took, rightly so, it impacted on them, particularly around how they perceived. How it was perceived that it was a criticism around how they were cared for, particularly when they had trusting relationships between the staff, and that we had strong planning and positive connections to family and friends. There was some process issues that we needed to address, and that was quite challenging coming out of a pandemic where we've seen our service pre-COVID being at a 6, but we were the quality indicators were indicating a 4. Okay, so we are quite happy about the standard of the service our young people are meeting and receiving. They too are very proud of their identity and their relationships within the home, and decided that they would speak to the people, or their perception of the people that were critical. So they wrote to a local newspaper, who we have received very positive response to, who are very interested to hear the stories of the young people, and they're planning a level of engagement, and they are currently, and they have written to the Care Inspectorate, about the reflections about the way that the report has been written and the language that's been used, that they have found it less than adequate in terms of how that described their home. So I think it was a really good example of voice and listening to our young people, and actually that they felt confident enough to take these steps. So we were very supportive of them. So I think that comes to the end. Oh no, the last one is the Ideas Project. And in bearing in mind that you were interested in impact, I will go away and look at this because my short update hasn't addressed the issue of impact. But what it has said is that we are putting additional outreach within the community in the Inverclyde Centre and continuing to support Thrive Under 5 and our small mentored loans with 2 local credit unions. But I do appreciate that the request was for impact, and that's got lost in translation again. So we will bring it back and give you impact. We'll just give you a short report on impact. So any other questions?
Yeah, thanks, Kate. I mean, that's a really wholesome update. I mean, a lot of stuff on young people in there, which is deservedly right. I'm glad that you've covered a lot of things that touch on young and looked after folks. Really good. Thank you for agreeing to just bring back a little bit more. I know that, as you said, the minute back to June last year is looking for local impact. So maybe just give us something that allows us to close that item. So for the benefit of the minute, Diane, we'll just leave that item back on the RAL as open at this stage when it was indicated to close. So that leaves me the option now just to open this up. Any thoughts or questions that folks want to raise on the issues that Kate has covered there? Quite an expansive range of subjects. Questions. Let me look, see what I can get. Everyone looks very content this afternoon. I mean, we had a long discussion there, I guess, at the break point about safe staffing. That is something I suspect that we will come back and return to at some stage. And thanks again, as I said, for the update of the various looked after children's issues, and of course the bit about the MAT standards as well, and also for agreeing to bring back just a bit more on the Ideas Project. So with that in mind, thank you, Kate. That moves us on to item 10. I'll just pause and allow Vicky to tell me that any members of the public